Hey you guys, it's Jen and I am back. I haven't uploaded to YouTube in a hot minute, but I'm kind of having a miraculous day. My niche and what I discuss, what I'm living for, passionate about, and very interested in, and training to actually help those who have been harmed by polypharma, with psychiatric meds in particular, and especially benzodiazepine. In my opinion, among the most evil of them all, if you look at it from a spiritual perspective, because not only the harms it itself caused, but how it has corrupted an entire system, starting literally from Washington down to Big Pharma, down to the FDA, which gives the stamp of approval on everything, and then to the doctors, which I'm gonna guess when my shit started back in 1997, there was a lot of what I'm gonna give enough grace to call honest ignorance with most of the doctors. And therapy had also dramatically changed by then. I remember going in my early 20s. I definitely had some issues with substances in my adolescence and up to 22 years old, which would have brought it to about 1985. And I had used like Valium, I think, a few times throughout that journey, but it wasn't readily available. It was certainly nothing you could walk into your doctor's office like you can today. Especially like in the state of Massachusetts, their Medicaid insurance is literally the best insurance in the world. It covers absolutely everything, including transportation if you don't have it, someone to come pick you up, drop off prescriptions, the whole 9 yards. But in any event, so that was about 15 years, and built a life literally second to none. I had this gorgeous baby. Was married to his dad, and we had the little house on the beach, like everything. I don't have a college degree yet. Probably won't. I'm just giving my age. I can't realistically see myself doing even 2 years for an associate's, but I was going to college at that time and attempting it. It was just too much. I already worked outside the house. My son was a daycare baby, which I hated, but I loved where he landed. I had private families that took care of him, and he had the same one throughout his childhood, and she was wonderful. But so I excelled in my professions and careers. I had just passed the civil service exam because I wanted to be a cop at one point, and then realized I was pregnant with my son, so that kind of went out the window. And I always had a passionate interest in both medicine and especially law. Looking back, I'm gonna say that I was obviously very, very naive, and things were also not as bad as they are now in terms of corruption. In the 80s, things were pretty, or more, on the up and up than they are now. But over the years, this has just become a billions and billions and billions of dollars industrial complex. By the time you get to the pharmaceutical companies and the FDA, and I finally started listening to Dr. Joseph Dorwitting at Taper Clinic on YouTube, and realized he would have been censored like 4 years ago. There's no way. He also worked at a pharmaceutical company and for the FDA, and is a board certified psychiatrist. So he has a lot of what we'll call inside information, and He would have been considered at least a whistleblower if he wasn't just shut down altogether. And a whistleblower he is. And everything I suspected about this prolonged being prescribed a benzodiazepine turned out to be absolutely true. And the last psychiatrist I had validated even more just how nefarious they can truly be. Now I'm taping this as I'm actually doing my walk, which I found critically beneficial in my healing, and outside. On a bad day I can hop in the gym and go on the treadmill, and I'll still get the physical benefit from it, but there's such a deeper mental / spiritual benefit from walking in the elements. And I'm talking like in July in the Georgia heat. It's September now, it's still really hot here, but there's a little bit of a breeze. And I don't know if it's related to the benzos or the brain injury or whatever it is, but I have heard from other people, and I know for myself, seasons seem to have a huge effect. I grew up in New England, which is basically like dark and freezing cold for 8 months out of the year. And I do know people that have never touched anything like this, that go for they call it SAD, seasonal attention deficit or disorder, get depressed in the winter. And I have always found like January and February are really tough months for me, and then I'm trying to break out of it by March, and usually by spring I feel better and I'm stoked for summer. And I love summer, but I found as I've gotten older, the heat affects me in a much different way. I mean, the first hint of over 50 degrees, I was the one like in the bathing suit, as close to any form of water I could be, and tanning really, really well. And I can't bear that anymore. I can't bear to lay there for an hour. I love swimming, but that's what I'm doing if I'm down the pool. If I sit there for a minute, it's to dry off. But I'm talking about this now today because I don't want to say slacked off, because every day, one little thing can be a major accomplishment. Days like today where there's, compared to people who do not have this injury and who have not experienced this, my husband's a perfect example. He's never taken a medication outside of pain medication after a surgery in the hospital. And when it's done, he doesn't think about it. And I watch him sometimes with awe in the morning, whether he sleeps in a little later, whether he had a tough night and get a good night's rest, whether he's going through something difficult, the routine never varies. He's not one to sit there and have coffee and turn the TV on for 2 hours like I am. He just gets up and goes. And I really, really had to think about that, because I blamed a lot of that on the injury. And I'm sure it's correlated in one way or another, but I'm thinking back to even before. Never a morning person. And I heard somebody today I was calling her Marissa yesterday, but her name is actually Melissa Pistillo, I want to say Pistillo. I downloaded one of her videos and on TikTok, I think, and have her saved here. She has a different guest on every day. She's definitely been through this herself, and just the most valuable information I've ever heard. But what I was waiting to hear about and never had was how, if at all, like age affects it. When you're older and you've been on them so much longer. And, I'm on a taper. I've gotten off like 3 milligrams, and I've kind of plateaued out at 2. And the more I learn about it, the luckier I feel, the more blessed I feel, I should say, in that most people start having the problems at the tolerance point. In other words, they've hit their tolerance wall, it's not working, it's not only not working, it's backfiring. And when I look back at my withdrawals, acute or otherwise, like I had Ativan for many, many years, and it's so short acting, the tendency to use more than prescribed was absolutely there. But it's been a long, long time since any of that happened. Now, nearly a decade of exactly as prescribed, and honestly, I was doing even sometimes less. I plateaued at 2 milligrams, and if I would take one in the afternoon, which is unusual, you just take the 2 at bed, forget about it, and I know their only purpose is to stave off withdrawals. And I'm hearing from everybody that I am one of the lucky ones, although I'm recognizing some patterns and behaviors in my life that are directly related that I hear happens to people to one degree or another, but I feel okay where I am. And the only purpose for even continuing at all is to stave off a withdrawal, which they've done. And I'm wondering about, my husband and I would call them these funks that I go into. I've been battling those since the first prescription. Just like, I'll might as well be, and no offense or disrespect if you are paraplegic, but mentally, I might as well be one, in terms of I'm not getting out of that bed unless I absolutely have to. And because I got disability so early on, my second child was raised with it, which kind of sucks. Poverty sucks. Had decent money with my firstborn, and just made it a lot of difference. Of course, it made everything much easier. But, we definitely got by. He was never deprived of certainly the basics, the essentials, and every once in a while we could scrape together enough for a PS4 and then 5, and God knows what it's up to now. But they're growing on their own. So back then I had no idea what was happening to me. All I knew is if that for any reason, my former situation, my ex-husband, his son is severely addicted, and without fail, every time he was living with us, he stole the medications. And I mean, like, you feel it that day. And he would leave too, and then they would gaslight me and try to tell me I miscounted, or I used, like, I think I was getting like 8 pills a day. But anyway, so it absolutely makes sense to me, that I was in and out of acute withdrawal constantly. I knew better. I did have to go to the hospital in that town once because it was so bad. I was seizing at home, and I knew it. And my seizures kind of look like, they've never happened in front of a doctor, of course, but my jaw locked up really tight. It's excruciating. I'm conscious. I'm aware of everything that happens. And unfortunately, my saliva glands don't. So the jaw's locked up. Saliva glands are over-functioning, if anything. I can't do anything about it. I can't speak and explain to anybody what's happening. And only one other person has actually seen this. Just some of the horrors. But I have learned everything about it and how it operates from that very powerful hierarchy starting in Washington on down. I think, hope, pray, and believe Kennedy will eventually get around to this, but you got to think about it when it comes to psychiatrists. They don't do therapy with you anymore. That's how this whole thing got started, when I cleaned up from all the partying days as an adolescent. I also come from a very, very traumatic childhood. So I went into therapy, and it was so beneficial and so awesome, between like the 12-step programs. And the first therapist was this big biker guy who was also in the program. And then I eventually moved to this girl, Pam, I'll call her. And it was like twice a week, one-on-one. And then 3 times a week, twice a week on one-on-one. And then one women's group meeting. Whoa, I just walked farther than I was planning to. And I'm not totally winded yet. So let me turn around. When I get to a really pretty place on the path, it's all pretty. I'll show you guys. So I began to learn what was happening. I related a lot to the relationship. It was happening because of the relationship, but that was also like the doctors, just somebody, I know the lighting's terrible here, just somebody totally gaslit for 5 years, by not only him, but the kids as well. One of them has had actually both of them have, told me that. And, that basically they don't understand how I survived that level of gaslighting. But I did, because I knew, and I never gave up or gave in. I knew what I knew to be true, to be factual, and I had 3-on-1 at one point, and they even tried to pull my baby into it, who was like only 11 at the time. I just turned 12, and it worked until I literally had to put him in the car, take him for a long drive, and explain to this poor kid what was going on. And so once he stopped participating in the gaslighting, they started bullying him really bad. So the whole thing was just a shit show. But it is long over. He wound up having to go to prison to serve 5 years of a 20-year sentence, I believe, on 2 felonies. Not at all surprising. And I remarried and rebuilt a life. I'm very, very good at that. I am very, very good at losing absolutely everything and rebuilding. And it's happened so many times in my life. I would say, yes, it's a habit. And I can also tell you when it started. And it actually started before I even filled those first prescriptions of SSRIs and the benzodiazepine, because I was reacting as any human being would to very stressful situations, very saddening. We don't ever use the word depressing anymore. They abuse you when you use that word, medically speaking. So a lot of stuff was going on that was just really, really sad, highly stressful. Despite my husband working and making decent money, I financially carried the house until the very end. So there's a lot of pressure. I was constantly worried about my little boy, because his father and I were fighting an awful lot in front of him. And, he was just that type of kid. All kids do internalize it, but he would do it to a point where it manifested physically. I remember one Saturday, after a screaming match and name-calling between his father and I, he told me he had a really bad tummy ache. I took him to the pediatrician, and he said, "How did you get here?" I drove, and he's listening to his stomach, and he goes, "I'm calling the emergency room to the nearest hospital, and I want you to get him admitted right away." I'm like, what's wrong? He goes, I don't know, but there's something very wrong. So now in a panic, and the kid's burning up at this point. So they get him to the hospital. He's in agony. His fever is climbing to dangerous levels. And they had done some basic tests, and the only thing left to do was a CAT scan. And by then, he was so ill, and the fever was so high, they had just said, we're going to have to go with a burst appendix. and take his appendix out. And that's what they did. They rushed him into surgery. They didn't have time to do the CAT scan. And I'm there and listening to all this, but I couldn't even comprehend that his life might actually be compromised in any way. And then they come out. It was like a 25-minute operation, and they come out with this tiny little appendix on ice. And they were like, Mrs. So-and-so, this is a perfectly healthy appendix. So at least these guys were honest. There was no malpractice involved in it. They just knew they had to act and do something, and I'm glad they did. But even though it definitely wasn't the appendix, the fever was down, the white blood cell count was normalized, and he felt better. And this was the day before his birthday. He had to stay in for like 2 or 3 days after, including on his birthday, and woke up like ravenous the next morning, and they weren't letting him eat, which made absolutely no sense to me. But anyway, that's how, the point being, that's how much he actually physically internalized this. It had been going on for a while. It was escalating. It was getting worse. And that morning, you know how kids will try to distract when something uncomfortable is going on in their environment. And I just felt like his father would be poking, prodding, you know. He was an absolute cheater just about from day one or shortly thereafter. The woman I found out to ultimately be his mistress, the adulteress, I found a card for a place that she works in his wallet super early on, and have since found out from my adult son. I knew there was one time that he actually brought him and put him through the whole "we can't tell mommy" thing. And I had raised him, I'm not tooting my own horn here, I had raised him about good touch, bad touch, stranger danger, and you always have to tell mommy the truth. And he took that to heart. So I can just imagine this 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old boy going out, and as he got older, of course, he could pick up, this was another woman that daddy was not married to, but was behaving like he was. So it wasn't just a friend of daddy's. And we could definitely never, ever tell mommy. So my son since shared that with me. And isn't it funny, like the whole generational thing? I had such similar childhood atrocities, I would call them, but in my case, it was my mother, and it was physical abuse and an older sibling. But anywho, I heard on Melissa's podcast today, the guest that she had on, I want to say it was, I think he said it was from the Netherlands. Well, I am getting winded now, and it is still hot here, guys. Oh, you can take a peek at the shaded place I'm about to walk on. And I'm almost back home. If this is all I accomplished today, I'll be happy, but there's some things like I have to do anyway. But he was talking about the fact that, you know, he up-dosed, down-dosed, they fucked with it for years, so finally, like, it got to a point where he got a doctor that believed him or knew that he wasn't going to get away with their typical bullshit. Oh my God, that's gross, excuse me. I might have to cut that out or start over. But anyway, he decided, he has done a taper, and where he landed and where he plateaued, he had decided this is where he wants to stay. And I think most of us would decide that. You know, especially if you didn't get the tolerance withdrawal and you're not in that place as if you were in acute withdrawal. It can be like the same thing for some people. And I just didn't fall in that place. The tapering of the 3 milligrams wasn't fun, but I didn't know then, like what I know now either. So at least it's explainable. And given my age, in my early 60s, it's been 30 plus years of taking this now. I attempted a small taper on my 2 milligrams, take a quarter off. I was going to cut a quarter like every 6 months. I looked into microdosing with liquid, all kinds of different things. And the advice I got is that, just talk to your pharmacist about this liquid. It's not supposed to be with water because water can actually dilute the dosage. So it's a special liquid that doesn't dilute or ruin the integrity of the dosage. And in some cases, my Dr. Joe Whitting was talking about literally 0.10 a day, depending on what the benzodiazepine is. But I just went ahead and cut it up and, realized I think getting exact dosages are absolutely critical for the process. And then started immediately seeing changes, and I had to really, really be honest with myself and saying, all right, is this changes just because of the new information that I have, or is this really, really happening? So that's why I haven't been around, and that's why I haven't uploaded in a while here. I really needed to be honest and see for myself, and I think it was very related. And right now, the 2 milligrams is not in threat. I have an osteopathic doctor that absolutely understands and believes, supports, and validates, will probably play a very, very crucial role in a lawsuit against the last one, who did an abrupt abandonment completely. Just 100% stop, F you, you're on your own kind of thing. And this was based on a coming up negative for Klonopin. And you guys have to know that's happening everywhere. It's a known thing, like in Massachusetts. I don't know what's going on with my son's relationship, but when I was there in April, he was somebody degreed in psychology working as a case manager, and they were out now told, don't make a big deal out of it. If it's a well-established patient, if they're new. When it first happened to me in 22, now you got to remember, it's never not been in my system every single day for the past 7 years, just a lower dosage in the past 3 years, right? So every single day, it's always showing up, and every other benzo is showing up except for this one. And then I started hearing about it from lots of people. My doctor has looked into it. I've spoken to the labs. And I believe the first person that you speak to has that, what I call that honest ignorance, really didn't seem to know. Because, he was taking a shot in the dark at it being, at the possibilities of, maybe it hung around too while before it was sent out. All real possibilities. But it shouldn't matter if it's always in your system every single day. It could sit there for a friggin' week and it should show up. So I don't know what nefarious reasons they would have for removing, I'm not a lab researcher or a scientist either, but for removing that one component, not for benzodiazepines. Everything else is showing up just fine, but for clonazepam only. And so that happened, off and on a few times throughout 22, 23, 24. My doses never changed. The way that I took it every evening has never changed. And the first time it happened with the provider before the one, I hope actually goes in front of a trial instead of getting settled out of court. He's just evil. Unfortunately, being evil isn't illegal, but everything else he did was and is. Train of thought thing. So common. I'm pretty used to it. And if you're even listening to this, you probably had some experience with it. So if you know, kind of a thing. But anyway, it was a matter of deciding, okay, so I plateaued on the tolerance decades and decades ago. I'm doing well. Given my age and the number of years that I've been on them, do I even want to stop? Now, most people I've worked with, doing this almost full time now, their reasons for wanting to stop is, yes, there's a lot to be said for completely jumping off, but being okay and really being able to reclaim your freedom and your quality of life and be released from the need for, especially the psychiatric industry, anything related to that. It is a beautiful freedom, and I would wish it for anybody that got sucked up in this, like I said, billions and billions of dollar industry. And I mean, the greed is so unbelievable. They could put stricter guidelines. They could at least pass the bill for informed consent. 43 states, they won't do it. So they have permission and encouragement to lie to you. They want to give you the best case scenario, and they will definitely lie about the ease on which you can come off it. The last 3 providers I had right out of the gate were like, we'll do 8 weeks and load you up with some Seroquel or Zoloft or some other crap, which is absolutely, I intuitively know, the absolute worst thing that could happen. 8 weeks could kill somebody on 5 milligrams for over 30 years, off and on, but on for 7 years. And when I pointed that reality out, I could see they were just pissed off about it. One provider actually, I fought him every step of the way on the antidepressants. I haven't put one to my mouth since I was 40 years old, and I'm not going to. In terms of suicidal ideology, it came close, we'll just put it that way, and there's just no way. And at one appointment, his exact words is he literally bargained with me on it. I would say this is very unethical, but I said, look, I'm not going to take them. Please look at my records and see the effects like everyone had on me, combinations of them, dosage uppers. Oh, well, there's new stuff out now you've never heard of, and this one isn't an SSRI, and I said no, and he goes, well, you know what? It's America. You have the right to refuse it, but I also have the right to refuse the Klonopin. So in other words, he was literally saying, if I don't get this filled, and mind you, I never saw him. It was all doxy. Never even saw him, was never tested, anything with this particular doctor. And so I knew what I was going to do. You have to learn to play the game once you understand what's happening to you. I would never encourage or support withholding information from your doctors, but once they know that egos get in the way, man, and they don't like it, and they get nervous because they are being sued at a much higher rate, and there are attorneys willing to take them on in the past 5 to 7 years, and people are settling out at like 8 figures. So that was his deal, and this was something brand new that just hit the market that wasn't SSRI. It was Seroquel. It wasn't new. It was I didn't recognize the generic name until I actually looked it up, and that's what it was. And I believe that's antipsychotic. I don't think that's an SSRI. But either way, to make his billing department happy, to make him happy, of course we had to fill him every month and just chuck him. It's never in a million years was I going to do it, and I didn't. But that's what I had to do to get my medication. And it's sad but true. if you don't know what's going on with yourself yet, you're at the mercy of these doctors. I had figured out exactly what's happening, exactly what their game is, how dark what they're doing actually is, and knew all I needed was, and people are passing, so I'm going to be a little silent for a minute. Oh, the cutest babies. I knew what was happening. I knew how nefarious they were. The egos were insane. The gaslighting was insane. So I had to kind of play their game with them and give them the impression that, oh God, I'm so grateful and blah, 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 and not really tell them that I knew. And the only, I had to answer those ridiculous questions every month. Are you feeling suicidal? How is your major depressive disorder? How is your major anxiety disorder? All diagnoses that never existed until after the drugs. I just wanted to talk to a therapist. Cognitive behavior therapy. And the whole system had changed out in that 15 years. I was just living life. I was responding to a very stressful situation. It's normal to be stressed. And had I never went, I know just for the sake of my child alone, it would have passed and I would have landed in probably an even better place. So I guess I'm going in the direction of, you just have to kind of play along. And this last one, I gave it a shot. The director, the main doctor, Dr. Randy Warner, if you're in the Georgia area, avoid this practice. It's the one that's being sued, Psychiatric of Atlantis. But I started becoming more comfortable with the provider. I thought there had to be 50 or 60 of them because I remember the front desk and the provider telling me they're seeing hundreds and hundreds of patients per day. So please be patient. Dr. Warner has to sign off on every prescription. And it was just bullshit. There were some appointments where as soon as we would hang up, I'd get the text from the pharmacy. And other times, if she just forgot because she was not at all paying attention. But nonetheless, I decided to give it a shot and kind of told her, no, I'm not suicidal. No, I'm not having any hallucinations. I never had major anxiety disorder. No, never had major depressive disorder. And I told her the story of how they just merely medicated immediately normal. I was never asked in all those 30 years. I volunteer the information sometimes, but was never really asked, like, what is your marital situation like? What do you eat? Do you exercise? Have you tried this supplement? Nothing until you get to like an osteopath or a homeopathic or functional medicine doctor, who I believe are going to be mainstream over the next 10 years, maybe less. I think they're going to be birthing out babies because they can be trusted. The whole thing with them is to treat the whole body and mind and realize you cannot separate that. You would think psychiatry would look at it like that, but no, since the money got involved. And think about it too, if you were to put restrictions on, let's say, even just benzodiazepines, and you had to give informed consent, most people are going to decline. They've lost a third of their practice. They are the only doctors that do not look at the organ, clinically prove the diagnosis. You're having heart problems, you go to your cardiologist, they could take a bunch of tests and see exactly what's wrong. They look at the heart very, very carefully. Gastroenterologists, they stick a camera down your gut and they'll look at everything. They'll do colonoscopy. They look at the specialty that they're treating. There's a part of me that tends to believe if you're in the 1% or you're really wealthy, they probably can and do test for certain abnormalities. Whenever you have a doctor who is telling you, we don't know how it works, we just know it does. They always throw that in there. And what we do is, we have to have you on them for 2 weeks to 30 days and see how you respond. If you don't respond well, it's not like you stop them because they don't work. You just take more of them, or maybe add another one on, which is the merry-go-round I got on for over a decade. And by the time I realized and stepped into healing, it was all gone. It was all gone. My kids were grown. The suffering they went through because of it, it's all in the past now. The losses, I was able to get disability very early on, which is a mixed blessing, but I gotta say, more of a blessing, because I had no capacity to do anything. I've been starting up businesses and going for it the past 7 years, but now I'm getting winded, guys. But I just wanted to tell you, if you're in that place, maybe with me totally cutting off or seriously cutting down, it could cost me the rest of my life. If not physically, as far as the ability to take care of my husband when he needs it. He has his own medical conditions that are his business, but or anything my adult children might need, my ability to function might be gone. I could lose my mind. And there are a lot of cases where once that's happened and you've gone over the edge, even returning to it does not work. And I think that, the support groups on Facebook are awesome. I think there's a lot of people that are thinking about that, and because it's all about tapering, and that's what we talk about, and we exchange ideas, we support, we encourage. One guy today was really upset about, just hearing all the scary, terrible stories. He was in a really tough place himself, But if I were to jump on a site where it was all, rainbows and unicorns, there's nothing for me there. I know that's just not real. That's not how it happens. So it's a mixture of both. But today was the first time, and I think people in the groups might be hesitant to say, wait a minute, what if we have decided, regardless of age, but because you're at a certain age, what if we've decided to just stay where we are, or maybe just knock off a little bit and decide to stay at a certain percentage. I have a wonderful doctor, and all the insurance in the world. When that quarter thing started freaking me out, we went right back up to the 2. Okay, and I know a lot of people stop because the doctors are pressuring, they're getting worried, they're learning too much and telling the doctors how much they've learned, or the doctors retire and the new one doesn't do that, or they're just plain tired of having to play this ridiculous game, knowing that they are dealing with evil, just evil, dark, greedy people. So I don't know, guys. I'd love to know your thoughts on it. I think I'm going in that direction. And if the day should come where I no longer have access for whatever reason and I go crazy, hopefully I'll be old enough not to give a fuck about it too much. But that's kind of impossible, on like the neurologic, the electrical stuff that goes on in your body alone is unbearable. And then the physical pain and everything that is involved with it. So I think right now, and this is open to change, every day is, that's kind of where I'm at. I did get out and get my walk in for the first time in 2 weeks. So that's the idea I'm going with. I need subscribers. I'd love to go live. I think you used to have have to have 100, and now you only need 50. So please tap it. Leave a comment. If you have something to say, either way, I'd love to hear from you.